I sat by the window and watched the children playing in the yard. Their cries came through the open window, along with the smell of spring dampness and melted snow. March in Oak Creek was always like that, uncertain, when you couldn't tell if it was still winter or spring. I held a cup of cooled tea in my hands and thought about the fact that my son was getting married in 4 days. Lawrence is 38. He hadn't married in a long time, and I'd already resigned myself to the idea that there would be no grandchildren. But 2 years ago, he brought home Cheryl, a thin woman with sharp cheekbones and quick movements. She worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic on Maple Street, wore neat blouses, and always fixed her hair when she spoke. I tried to like her. I honestly tried. But something inside me resisted, though I never let myself admit it out loud. My apartment was small, 2 rooms on the third floor of an old brick building. After Edward died 15 years ago, I'd stayed here alone. I didn't want to sell, though Lawrence had hinted more than once that I should move into something smaller and more modern. He said the old house required too much maintenance, that the stairs were steep, that the neighborhood wasn't the same anymore. But I got used to these walls, to the creak of the parquet in the hallway, to the view of the playground from the window. This is where I've lived for 43 years. This is where Lawrence was born. Edward died here. Leaving here felt like a betrayal of all those years. The tea in my cup had long since gone cold, but I took a small sip anyway. Bitter, unpalatable. I set the cup on the windowsill and looked at my hands dry, with protruding veins, with age spots. I'm 72. Sometimes I forget that, and then I see my reflection in the mirror, or look at my hands and remember. The doorbell rang sharply, and I flinched, spilling a few drops of tea on the windowsill. I wiped them off with the sleeve of my cardigan and went to open the door, holding on to the wall, my knee aching as it always did in wet weather. Lawrence stood at the door, tall, with a balding head, his black jacket open. Next to him was Cheryl in a white down jacket that made her look even thinner, almost ghostly. "Hi, Mom." Lawrence stepped into the hallway without waiting for an invitation. "We won't be long. Cheryl has a meeting with the florist in an hour." "Hello?" I stepped aside to let them in. "Come in, I'll put the kettle on." "No need." Cheryl pulled off her gloves and slipped them into her pocket. "We'll only be a minute, really." They went into the living room, and I followed them. Lawrence immediately sank down onto the couch, leaned back, put his leg over his foot. He'd always sat like that, ever since he was a kid, sprawled out, taking up a lot of space, as if the world had to move in and give him room. Cheryl remained standing by the bookcase, looking at the spines of the old volumes. She ran her finger over the binding of the Turgenev collection Edward had given me for my 20th wedding anniversary, and I saw her lips curl into a slight grin. I sat down in the chair across from my son and folded my hands in my lap. "We wanted to go over the last few details," Lawrence began, pulling out his cell phone. "About Saturday. The ceremony starts at 3 in the afternoon, and everyone should be there by 2:30. You remember the address of the restaurant, right?" "I do," I nodded. "Riverview on Oakchester Avenue." "Right. The dress code is cocktail dresses for women, suits for men. Nothing flashy. Cheryl's very concerned about making everything look classy." I nodded again. "I had a navy blue dress I'd bought 3 years ago for the anniversary of the insurance company where I'd worked for 42 years as a secretary. It was hanging in my closet, neatly wrapped in a pouch. I tried it on last night and it fit fine, although it was a little looser in the waist. I've lost weight in the last year. My appetite was gone. Food seemed bland and unnecessary." "Mom, are you listening?" Lawrence looked up from the screen. "Yes, of course." I straightened up in my chair. "I'm listening, honey." "There will be about 70 guests," he continued, running his finger over the phone screen. "Maybe a little more. Cheryl invited her co-workers, and I invited the guys from work. More relatives, friends. Aunt Viv and Uncle Curtis are coming from Hartford. 70 people. I exhaled slowly. When Edward and I got married, we had 23 guests at our wedding. We had rented a small hall at the community center, and my mother had baked the cake herself, a three-tiered cake with cream roses. It was February of 75, and it was snowing outside. Edward wore a gray suit he'd rented, and I wore a simple white dress that a neighbor had made for $30. We danced to a Frank Sinatra record, and I was happy. At the time, I didn't think I needed more than that. That's a lot, I said carefully. It's fine, Lawrence said. An average wedding. Derek from work had 120 guests last year. Can you believe it? I didn't know any Derek. Lawrence rarely told me about his coworkers. He worked as a technologist in a packaging materials factory, something to do with quality control and manufacturing processes. I didn't understand exactly what he did, though he tried to explain a couple times. The words were flying out of my head, leaving only the feeling that my son was doing something important, serious, grown up. Cheryl turned around from the bookcase. Your wedding was in 75, Greta. It's different now. Different standards, different expectations. She called me by my first name, not Mom or even Mommy. I didn't take offense. I tried not to take offense. I didn't think I had earned the right to demand it from her. We were almost the same age. Cheryl was 36. I was 72. It was a big difference, but I still felt younger, more insecure. I understand, I said quietly. I just thought you wanted something more modest. You said in January when we discussed. We said we didn't want to make a circus out of it, Lawrence interrupted. But 70 people is not a circus. It's a normal wedding. You do realize that people expect a certain level, don't you? Cheryl works in a decent clinic. I'm not the last man in the factory. We can't just invite everyone to some diner. I clenched my fingers in my lap. A familiar feeling of unease came up in my stomach. A dull, aching sensation. It was always there when I felt like I was saying the wrong thing, like I was annoying, like I was getting in the way. When Lawrence was a teenager, he'd often rolled his eyes at my words, sighed, gone to his room, and slammed the door shut. Edward had said it was normal, that all teenagers were like that. But Lawrence was 38 years old, and I was still afraid to say anything. Okay, I said. I just wanted to clarify because, since I'm paying for everything. Cheryl turned sharply, and I saw her eyes narrow. What exactly are you trying to say? Nothing. I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. It's just that we agreed on a modest ceremony. I'm not a rich woman, you know. I have a small pension and savings, but not endless. I just want to understand the scale of the expense. Lawrence put the phone on his knee and looked at me with undisguised irritation. Mom, we talked about this. You said yourself that you were ready to pay for the wedding. What? Now you've changed your mind? No. I quickly shook my head. No, of course not. I thought it would be easier. Less guests, less expense. I didn't expect that. Greta, Cheryl stepped closer, and I could see her thin lips tense. If you can't afford it, just say so. We'll find another option. Lawrence can ask Viv and Curtis for money, or we can take out a loan. But don't pretend you're a victim. I'm not pretending, I whispered. I really just want to understand. Understand what? Lawrence stood up from the couch, and I felt my heart sink. That you don't want money for your only son? Mom, it's my wedding. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Do you want me to remember it as something cheap and cheesy? No, honey. I stood up and reached out, but he backed away. I want you to be okay. I'm just worried. Worried about what? He zipped up his jacket in a sudden movement. About spending money on your only son's wedding? Mom, it's normal. Parents help their kids. You remember how your parents helped you with Edward, don't you? I remembered. Mom baked the cake, Dad paid the rent, $150. It was all their savings at the time. I remembered Mom crying in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't see because she was afraid there wasn't enough money. But she still did the best she could for me. That's what parents do. They give the last of it. I remember, I said. Good, Lawrence nodded. I don't know what you're worried about. It's going to be beautiful, dignified. You want me to have a nice wedding, don't you? Of course I do. Then don't talk about modesty. He took Cheryl's hand. Cheryl, come on. We're going to be late for the florist. We still have to pick out arrangements for the tables. Cheryl was already putting on her gloves. She gave me a quick glance, judgmental, cold, as if I were a nuisance to be endured. See you Saturday, Greta, she said, zipping up her down jacket. See you Saturday, I whispered. They walked out, and I walked them to the door. Lawrence didn't turn around, didn't wave goodbye. Cheryl didn't either. I stood in the hallway and listened to their footsteps fade up the stairs, to the slam of the front door. Then I went back into the living room and sank back into the chair. The apartment was quiet. Only the children were still screaming outside the window. One boy in a red jacket was chasing a girl, and she was squealing and laughing, stumbling over the melted patches of snow. I looked at them and remembered how Lawrence had been the same way, small, noisy, funny, how he used to bring me dandelions clutched in his dirty fist and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. When did that end? At what age did he stop looking at me with adoration and start rolling his eyes? I got up and walked to the kitchen. I poured the cool tea into the sink, rinsed the cup. My hands were shaking. I put the cup on the drying rack and opened a desk drawer, pulling out a folder of documents. The contract with Riverview Restaurant, the bill from the decorator, the bill from the band a live string quartet, as Cheryl had insisted. All in my name, all from my bank card. I ran my eyes over the numbers. Restaurant $8,200 for the banquet. The decorator, $2,400 for floral arrangements and decorating the hall. Musicians, $1,800. Another photographer, $1,200. Invitations, small things, another $400. That's $14,000, almost all of my savings, which I'd been saving for 30 years, saving a little from each paycheck. I closed the folder and slipped it back into the drawer. Lawrence is my only child, the only one. Edward is gone. My parents are gone. My sister Holly lives in California. We haven't spoken in 20 years after fighting over my mother's inheritance. All I have is Lawrence. I had to do everything I could for him. It's okay. It's the right thing to do. That's what mothers do. But the anxiety in my stomach wouldn't go away. It sat there like a heavy lump, and I couldn't get rid of it, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that everything was all right. Saturday was clear, with that deceptive March sun that shines brightly but doesn't warm. I woke up early, though I'd set my alarm for 9 in the morning. At 6, I was already lying there with my eyes open, looking up at the ceiling and going over in my head all the things I had to do. Iron my dress, shine my shoes, comb my hair. I didn't know how to style my hair nicely, always just pulling it into a low bun at the back of my head. Maybe I should have gone to a hairdresser, but it was too late, and it was a shame to spend the extra money. I got up and took a shower. The water flowed unevenly, hot and then slightly warm. The old pipes in the house needed replacing long ago. I washed in a hurry and wrapped myself in the terry cloth robe I'd bought when Edward was still alive. The fabric was frayed at the elbows, but I liked that it felt so soft, so settled. I made coffee in the kitchen and drank it, standing by the window. The yard was empty, the kids were still asleep or at home. I looked at the swings on which no one was swinging, at the sandbox covered with melted water, and thought about the fact that in a few hours my son would become a husband. That should have made me happy, but instead of joy, there was something heavy and anxious in my chest. I pulled a dark blue dress out of the closet and spread it out on the bed. The fabric seemed dull in the daylight, unappealing. I ran my hand over it, smoothing out the non-existent creases, and thought that Cheryl would probably be wearing something dazzling. She'd shown me a picture of her wedding dress a month ago, an off-white one with lace and a long train embroidered with tiny beads. I said it was beautiful. Cheryl nodded and put the phone away, not asking my opinion on anything else. It took me a long time to get dressed, zipping the dress up and down several times, making sure it fit evenly. It hung looser on me than it had 3 years ago when I'd bought it. I'd lost weight. Not on purpose, it was just that my appetite was gone. The food seemed bland, unpalatable. I forced myself to eat, but I still lost weight. I put on low-heeled, black, comfortable, round-toed shoes. I looked at myself in the mirror. An older woman in a boring dress stared back. Her face was pale, tired, her eyes dull. I tried to smile at my reflection, but the smile came out crooked, unsure, as if I didn't know how to do it. I'd called a cab in advance for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It would take 20 minutes to get to the restaurant, but I wanted to get there early in case I was needed, in case something needed to be done. The driver was a young guy in a black cap, headphones in his ears. He nodded at me when I got in the back seat, but didn't speak. I was glad. I didn't feel like talking, pretending to be cheerful and happy, answering questions about the wedding. I looked out the window at the Oak Creek streets floating by, familiar, ordinary, with peeling facades of old houses and sparse specks of new glass and concrete buildings. The Riverview restaurant stood on the riverbank, in a part of town I almost never traveled to. Everything here was more expensive, cleaner, more ornate. Stores with windows I didn't even dare to look in, cafes with marble tables outside, people in expensive clothes. When the cab stopped at the entrance, I saw a tall building of glass and light-colored stone, with wide steps and white columns at the entrance. I paid the driver $15. I gave him 20 and told him to keep the change. He nodded and drove off. I remained standing in front of the restaurant, clutching my purse in my hands. My legs suddenly felt woozy, heavy. I walked up the stairs, holding onto the railing. My knee was aching. It always did when the weather changed. The doctor said it was arthritis, prescribed pills, but they didn't help much. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The lobby smelled of flowers and something sweet, like perfume or air freshener. The walls were painted cream-colored, and the floor had beige tiles, shining like a mirror. Behind the counter stood a girl in a black suit. She smiled at me with a professional smile, white-toothed, perfect. "Good afternoon. Are you here for the Cromwell Gates event?" "Yes," I answered quietly. "I'm the mother of the groom." "Great, please come in. The Riverside Banquet Hall is on the second floor, to the left of the stairs." I nodded and headed for the wide staircase with its polished wooden banister. I walked up slowly, holding the handrail with both hands. My knee was aching more and more, and I regretted wearing heels, even if they were low. Upstairs was a long corridor with a thick carpet in a muted green color and gilt-framed paintings on the walls. I walked to the left, counting the doors, and found the one with the Riverside sign on it. I pushed it open and froze on the threshold. The banquet hall was huge, high ceilings with moldings, crystal chandeliers, from which the light fell softly, diffusely, walls in beige colors with gold inlays, panoramic windows overlooking the river. The water flowed calmly, glistening in the sun, and beyond it, you could see the opposite bank with trees just beginning to turn green. But it wasn't the size of the hall or the view from the windows. It was the fact that the hall was decorated as if it were being prepared for a royal wedding. Everywhere were compositions of white roses, orchids, and some strange flowers with long petals, the names of which I did not know. huge vases on high stands covered with greenery, garlands of small white buds descending from the ceiling like waterfalls, rose petals scattered on the tables, on the windowsills. The smell was thick, almost intoxicating. The tables, there were at least 10 of them, each covered with a snow-white tablecloth with embroidery on the edges, were set with crystal and silver, glasses of different shapes and sizes, plates with a golden border, forks and knives, arranged in some order I did not understand. In the center of each table there was another flower arrangement, smaller but no less luxurious. At the far wall near the windows stood 4 musicians in black suits. They were tuning instruments, 2 violins, a cello, and a double bass. One of the musicians struck the strings with his bow, and the sound spilled into the hall, clear and tinkling. I stood at the entrance and couldn't move. This wasn't what we'd agreed on. It wasn't that at all. It was luxurious, insanely expensive, in a way I couldn't afford. Not in any world, not under any circumstances. Greta? I flinched and turned around. Cheryl was walking toward me, and for a second I forgot to breathe. She was in her wedding dress, white and figure-hugging, with open shoulders and a long train that followed her across the carpet, rustling quietly, almost inaudibly. The dress was studded with small rhinestones, and they sparkled with every step, like dewdrops in the sun. Her hair was arranged in a high style, every strand in place. Her makeup was flawless. Her eyes were lined with a black arrow. Her lips were painted with a delicate pink gloss. Her cheekbones were emphasized with blush. Around her neck was a thin necklace with diamonds. They too sparkled, reflecting the light of the chandeliers. She was beautiful with that cold, unapproachable beauty they show in magazines. The kind of beauty that makes you want to look away because you feel like a gray mouse next to her. "You're late, Mom," she said, stopping in front of me. Her voice was steady, but she sounded annoyed. I blinked, not understanding. "Late? But the ceremony is at 3, and it's only 2. I told everyone to be here at 2 for group photos before the ceremony." Cheryl adjusted her earring, a small pearl in her ear. "Didn't Lawrence tell you?" "No," I whispered. "He didn't." "Typical," she sighed, rolling her eyes. "Okay, that's okay. Go sit somewhere. We'll get started soon." She turned around and walked back to the group of people standing by the window. The plume of her dress rustled on the carpet, the rhinestones glittering. I recognized a few of them: Aunt Viv in a bright yellow suit, Uncle Curtis in gray, Lawrence's cousin Patrice with her husband and 2 children. The rest were unfamiliar to me. 25 people, at least, all dressed up, lively, laughing. They were holding champagne glasses, talking loudly, interrupting each other. Someone laughed particularly loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. I walked slowly along the walls, trying not to attract attention, and sank into a chair at one of the far tables. I put my purse on my lap, clutching it so tightly that my fingers turned white. My heart was beating fast, unevenly, and my temples were pounding. I looked around the room again, trying to calculate the approximate cost of all this. Flowers. Probably 3 or 4,000, if not more. Maybe even 5. Musicians, I'd paid 1,800 for a quartet, but that was based on a 2-hour chamber performance, not a full day. If they play all night, it could be 3,000 or more. The banquet was 8,200, but that was the price for 50 people, and it was obviously more. 70, like Lawrence said. Maybe even more. I felt nauseous. I swallowed, trying to keep the panic out of my throat, clutching my purse even tighter. It was hard to breathe. The air felt thick. Someone laughed loudly at the window, and I flinched. The musicians began to play something light, classical. I didn't recognize the melody, but it was beautiful. The sounds of violins poured through the hall, intertwined with the cello, the double bass adding depth. The music was beautiful and completely inappropriate for my condition. I wanted to get up and leave. Just walk out of here. No explanations, no goodbyes. Go downstairs, call a cab, and go home. Lock myself in my apartment and never go out again. But my legs wouldn't listen. I sat on the chair, clutching my purse, and I couldn't move. Mom! I looked up. Lawrence was walking toward me across the hall, wearing a gray three-piece suit, perfectly tailored, with a white rose boutonniere on his lapel. His shirt was snow white, his tie was gray with a thin stripe, and his shoes were polished to a shine. He looked grown up, solid, alien. So alien, like I was seeing him for the first time. I stood up, my purse fell to the floor, and I bent down and picked it up, my fingers trembling. Hi, honey, I said, straightening up. You're very handsome. Thank you. He stopped beside me and gave me a quick glance from head to toe. It was an appraising look, and I felt my heart squeeze. Did you get here okay? Yeah, I took a cab. Good, good. Listen, I wanted to talk to you. He took my elbow firmly, almost painfully, and led me away, toward the corner of the room, away from the guests. Just don't make a scene, okay? I nodded, even though I didn't know what he was talking about. What scenes? I just wanted to understand what was going on. What's going on? I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Nothing's wrong. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture familiar from childhood. It was what he always did when he was angry or worried. I just want you to, you know, enjoy the holiday and not ask too many questions. Questions? I looked at him, not understanding. Lawrence, what's going on here? This, this isn't what we agreed on. I thought it was going to be a small ceremony, a few guests, simple decorations. But here? There's nothing wrong here, he interrupted, irritation in his voice. It's just that Cheryl and I decided to make it a little prettier than we'd originally planned. But the flowers, the musicians, the hall. I clutched my purse with both hands like it was a lifeline. Lawrence, this is costing a lot of money. I don't understand how, Mom, please. He rolled his eyes, and I saw the same irritation I'd seen in my apartment 3 days ago. The same impatience, the same tiredness of me. Don't start. Today is my day, Cheryl and I's day. We want it to be special. Is that so hard to understand? I understand, but you know I'm paying for. I know. He raised his voice sharply, loudly, then looked over his shoulder, made sure none of the guests could hear him, and continued quieter. But his voice became harder. I know you're paying for it. So what? That's a reason to have a lame wedding? I'm 38 years old, Mom. 38. I'm getting married for the first time in my life, and I want it to be dignified. I want people to see that I'm worth something. But I can't afford all that, I whispered, feeling the tears come to my throat, stinging, painful. Lawrence, honey, I don't know how I'm going to pay for all this. The bills they sent me were different. There was $8,000 for a banquet for 50 people, and here it was more. There was $1,800 for musicians for 2 hours, and it looks like they're gonna play all night. Flowers. There were no flowers for that amount of money. It's up to grown men to decide how they marry, he said, and there was steel in his voice, cold, hard. You're not a little girl, Mom. You want me to be okay, don't you? Cheryl to be happy? This is my wife, my family. Can't you just be happy for me? I looked at him and I didn't recognize him. It was my son, my little Lawrence, the one I'd given birth to 38 years ago, the one I'd held in my arms, fed, nursed when he was sick, comforted when he cried, who I'd raised alone for the last 15 years after Edward died, who I loved more than anything in the world, more than myself. But now there was a stranger standing in front of me, looking at me with undisguised contempt, as if I were a nuisance, as if I were something unnecessary and annoying. "I'm happy for you," I said, my voice shaking, breaking. "Of course I am. I just don't understand." "You don't have to understand anything." He turned around abruptly, almost rudely. "Just sit quietly and don't ruin our party, okay?" He left without waiting for an answer. He walked across the room to the window, where Cheryl stood surrounded by guests. She said something to him. He nodded, put his arm around her waist. They looked like a beautiful couple. Perfect. I was left standing in the corner, clutching my purse to my chest. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them spill. Not here, not now, not in front of all these people. I looked around the room, at the laughing guests in expensive outfits, at the musicians playing a beautiful tune, at the flowers, at the crystal, at the silver. Inside, everything clenched into a tight, painful lump. Resentment, fear, misunderstanding, shame all mixed into one, pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I walked slowly back to my desk and sat down. I put my purse on my lap, straightened my back, folded my arms. I would sit quietly. I won't ruin the party. I'll be a good mother who's happy for her son. But inside, something finally broke, cracked, fell apart. I sat at the table and watched the guests gradually fill the hall. They came in pairs, small groups, some alone, kissing Cheryl on both cheeks, hugging Lawrence, patting him on the back, laughing loudly and merrily, pulling out their phones and taking selfies against the windows overlooking the river. Someone went to the gift table near the entrance and left white envelopes or boxes wrapped in shiny silver paper with huge bows. The musicians continued to play. The melody changed, then slow and long, then a little faster, with light shimmers of violins, but always beautiful, graceful, filling the hall with an atmosphere of solemnity. No one came near me. I sat in the corner at the far table and was as if invisible, as if I were not here at all. Aunt Viv glanced in my direction as she passed by with a glass in her hand. But she didn't stop, didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was feeling. Uncle Curtis was talking to some man in a dark blue suit, standing at the window, gesticulating, laughing at something. Their voices loud, confident. Patrice was busy with her children. A boy of about 6 in a white shirt and black pants was running between the tables, almost knocking over a waiter with a tray. She caught him by the arm and hissed something, trying to calm him down, her face red with embarrassment. I glanced at the clock on my phone. 2:30. It was half an hour before the ceremony began, and the hall was slowly transforming from just a beautiful room into something alive, filled with people, their voices, their movements. Waiters in white shirts and black vests with gold buttons were arranging wicker baskets of bread on the tables, white, rye, with seeds, pouring ice water with lemon slices into tall glass pitchers. One of them walked right by me, and I smelled his cologne, a pungent, sweet vanilla scent that made me a little dizzy. My stomach twisted with anxiety, dull, painful, like something was clenching and unclenching in time with my heartbeat. I opened my purse, pulled out my phone, looked at the screen, no messages, no missed calls, just the time and date on the screensaver. I didn't know why I was even checking to see who was supposed to be calling me at a time like this. Lawrence was standing at the window, his arm around Cheryl's slim waist, smiling at the guests who came up to congratulate them in advance. He was busy, he was happy, he wasn't thinking about me at all. I put my phone back in my purse and looked around again, trying to gauge how many people were actually here. The guests were getting bigger by the minute. 50 people were definitely in the room, maybe even 60 or more. I lost count. All so dressed up, cheerful, loud, filling the space with their presence. Women in dresses of different colors: bright red, deep blue, emerald green, soft pink, one even in gold, shimmering with movement. Men in suits: black, gray, dark blue, someone in light shirts without jackets. Heels clattered on the parquet, creating a rhythmic background for conversations. Voices merged into one continuous hum, from which sometimes individual words or phrases were picked out. At 2:45, a photographer appeared, a tall man in his 50s in shabby jeans and a black shirt with rolled-up sleeves, with a neat gray beard and a professional camera around his neck. He started gathering the guests into groups, arranging them in front of the windows so that the river and the trees on the other side of the river would be in the frame, asking them to turn around, to look here, to smile wider. The shutter clicked again and again. Flashes flashed one after another, leaving white spots in the eyes. Everyone laughed, hugged each other, pressed against each other, posed with serious faces, or, on the contrary, made funny grimaces. No one called me for a picture. I sat at my table in the corner and watched everyone else taking pictures. First, the big group, 30 people, all together, then smaller ones, just close friends of the bride and groom. Lawrence and Cheryl were always in the center of the composition, and the guests lined up around them, creating a picturesque picture. Then the photographer asked only the relatives to stay: Viv in her bright yellow suit, Curtis, Patrice with her husband and children, a few other people I didn't know, probably Cheryl's family. I wasn't in those pictures, like I wasn't the groom's mother. Like the last 38 years of my life devoted to Lawrence had never happened. Something inside me clenched even tighter, tightening my chest so tight it was hard to breathe. It wasn't even pure resentment, something deeper, more painful. It was a feeling of complete irrelevance, emptiness, that cold, heavy emptiness that fills you from the inside and pushes everything else out. At 2:55, the musicians played louder and more solemnly. The violins sounded in unison. The cello added depth. The double bass created a powerful foundation for the melody. The guests began to take their seats, finding cards with their names on the tables, adjusting their chairs, making themselves comfortable. Waiters brought out champagne glasses, half filled, bubbles playfully rising to the surface, placed them neatly near each device. Someone sat down at my table, an elderly couple, a man and a woman in their 60s, both full-figured and well-dressed. They greeted me with a brief nod, and I nodded back, trying to put a semblance of a smile on my face. They didn't ask who I was, and I didn't ask them. The ceremony was about to begin. Lawrence and Cheryl stood at the window, their backs to the river, facing a man in his 40s in a gray three-piece suit with a folder in his hands, probably the one who would conduct the ceremony. The guests fell silent gradually, and the musicians played something particularly solemn and long. I stared at Lawrence without taking my eyes off him. His profile was so familiar, so native. A nose with a slight hunch, just like Edward's. His chin was stubborn, square. He stood very straight, shoulders squared, holding Cheryl's hand. They really were a handsome couple. The man in the gray suit opened a folder and began to speak in a measured manner. His voice was deep, pleasant. The words came to me in scraps: love, loyalty, support, the path you have chosen. I listened half-heartedly, not thinking about the meaning. Everything inside me shrank, 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 until I couldn't breathe at all. I couldn't sit still any longer. I stood up and the chair beneath me creaked loudly. The elderly couple at my desk turned around. I took a step forward, holding onto the edge of the table, then another. My legs felt heavy, but I forced myself to walk. Across the room, between the tables, past the guests who sat looking at Lawrence and Cheryl. The music was still playing. The man in the gray suit kept talking. I walked closer, stopping a few feet away from them. Lawrence turned his head and saw me. His face twitched, First surprise, then annoyance. Mom, he hissed through gritted teeth. What are you doing? Get back to your seat. I need to talk, I said, my voice shaking. Lawrence, this isn't what we agreed on. Several of the guests turned around. The man in the gray suit fell silent, looking at me with bewilderment. Cheryl released Lawrence's hand and took a step to the side, her face pale. Mom, not now. Lawrence stepped toward me and took my elbow. Come on, let's go back to our place. We'll discuss it later. No, I released his arm. I need to understand now. Lawrence, I can't pay for all this. I don't understand where this expense is coming from. We had agreed on a modest ceremony. Now all the guests were looking at us. The musicians had stopped playing. The room became quiet, a ringing silence. Mom, shut up, Lawrence hissed, his face reddening. Stop it. I just want to understand. You didn't pay for anything. He shouted loudly enough to startle everyone. You didn't put a single dollar into this wedding, not one. I blinked, not understanding. The guests murmured. How, how, how didn't I? I whispered. Lawrence, I paid for everything. The restaurant, the musicians, the decorator. You paid for nothing, he repeated, and there was anger in his voice. Cheryl and I paid for everything, everything, and you're embarrassing us. Get out. Cheryl came closer, standing next to Lawrence. You're embarrassing us, Greta, she said coldly. Get out of here, now. The guests looked at me. Aunt Viv turned away. Uncle Curtis stared into his glass. I stood in the middle of the hall and felt everything inside fall apart. Lawrence looked at me with hatred, Cheryl with contempt. I pulled my phone out of my purse. My hands were shaking. I unlocked the screen, opened the banking app, found the payments Riverview Restaurant, $8,200, paid February 28th. Decorator, $2,400. Musicians, $1,800. Would you like to see it? I asked loudly. The voice was strangely even. Here are the payments, all in my name, all from my card. Lawrence stepped toward me, grabbed my wrist. Mom, stop. No, I pulled my hand away. I won't. I hit the cancel button in front of the restaurant. The screen blinked. A window appeared. Are you sure? I clicked, yes. Then I canceled the payment to the decorator. Then I canceled the musicians. 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks. What are you doing? Lawrence screamed. Are you crazy? A woman in a black suit came running up to us, the one who'd met me at the counter. She had a worried look on her face. Excuse me, she said to Lawrence. There's a problem. The payment for the banquet has been canceled. The entire amount has been refunded. What? Lawrence turned to her, then to me. Mom, what are you doing? Mrs. Cromwell, the woman looked at me. Did you cancel the payment? Yes, I said. I canceled all payments. The woman turned pale. I'm afraid we can't continue with the event. Without payment, we are forced to discontinue the service. No. Cheryl stepped forward. Wait, we'll pay. Lawrence, tell them. Lawrence stood pale, mouth open. Yeah, I don't have that kind of money right now, he mumbled. We were counting on Mom. You counted on me to pay, I said quietly. And I did, a month ago, but you said I hadn't paid anything. So I canceled the payments. A man approached the woman, tall, gray-haired in a dark suit. The manager. She whispered something to him, and he frowned. Mr. Cromwell, he said to Lawrence, I'm afraid we have a problem. The payment has been canceled. We can't proceed without a guarantee of payment. I'll pay. Lawrence reached into his wallet, pulled out a card. Here, take it. The manager shook his head. It's over $14,000. We'll need to make a transaction, get confirmation. It'll take a while. How long? A few hours to a day. A day? Cheryl's in over her head. We got company, a wedding. I'm sorry, the manager said, but we can't do this without payment. The guests started to get up. Some took out their cell phones. Musicians gathered their instruments. Cheryl turned to me. You ruined everything, she screamed. You ruined my wedding. I looked at her calmly. You said I didn't pay for anything. I made up for it. Mom, Lawrence came over, his face wet with tears. Please, return the payments. I'll apologize. Just give it back. I looked at him, at the pleading in his eyes. No, I said. Mom, no, I said harder. You wanted me to leave. I'm leaving. I turned and walked toward the exit. Across the room, past the guests who parted, past the tables, past the flowers. No one stopped me. I walked out of the hall, down the stairs. In the lobby, the girl behind the counter watched with rounded eyes. I pushed open the door and stepped outside. It was cold. The wind was fluttering my hair. I walked a few steps, stopped, looked around. A tall building made of glass and stone. There were muffled screams coming from there. I pulled out my phone, called a cab. I stood and waited. My hands didn't shake, no tears. There was an emptiness inside, but strangely light. The cab arrived 5 minutes later. I got in, gave the address. The driver nodded. I stared out the window and thought I'd never go back to Riverview Restaurant again. The cab pulled up in front of my driveway at exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I paid the driver, counting out the crumpled bills with trembling fingers, stepped out onto the sidewalk, and looked up at the familiar brick building I'd lived in for so many years. It seemed the same as it always had, old, shabby, with peeling paint on the window frames and deep cracks in the facade that became more noticeable with each passing year. Nothing had changed in it since the morning I left for my son's wedding, but something inside me had changed irreversibly. Some inner core had broken, or, on the contrary, straightened. And from that, even the familiar look of the house seemed different, as if I was looking at it with completely alien eyes. I walked up the stairs slowly, holding on to the rough railing that had last been painted 10 years ago, the paint peeling in places, exposing the old wood. My knee was aching after a full day on my feet, in uncomfortable low-heeled shoes that still managed to rub a painful callus on my left heel. On the second floor, I stopped for a break, leaned my back against the cold wall covered with faded wallpaper, closed my eyes, and tried to catch my breath. I could still hear the voices in my ears, Lawrence's shrill scream, Cheryl's hysterical shriek, the muffled, frightened whispers of guests who didn't know where to look. I shook my head, trying to chase those sounds away, and walked on, forcing my legs to move through the pain, to the third floor, to my apartment. It took me a while to find the keys in my purse, my fingers shaking more than I thought they would, sliding over the small objects at the bottom. Finally, I pulled out a bunch of keys, inserted the right one into the lock, turned it with effort. The lock had been stuck for a long time. I should have called a master, but I couldn't get my hands on it, and pushed the door open with my shoulder. The apartment greeted me with silence and musty air that had stagnated during the day. I hadn't opened the windows since morning, afraid it would be too cold when I returned in the evening, even though the radiators were still working properly. I took off my shoes right in the hallway and left them where I stood, not tucked them neatly on the shelf as I always did. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook, trying not to look at her reflection in the mirror. I went into the room and sank down in the shabby armchair by the window without undressing, still in the dark blue dress that now seemed to me hateful. I sat staring out the window, unable to tear my gaze away. It was getting dusk outside the window. The March day is short, and it gets dark early. The lanterns in the yard came on one after another, with a soft buzzing, flooding the playground with yellow artificial light. There were no children. It was too late for play, and the weather had turned bad. A fine, cold rain began to drizzle. The swings swayed in the wind on their own, empty, creaking, making that lingering sound that always made me feel a little wistful. I stared at them and thought about nothing. My head was completely blank, as if someone had taken my mind off everything at once. The phone in my purse, which I'd never let go of, vibrated. I flinched in surprise, pulled out my phone, and looked at the screen. Lawrence. Incoming call. Name flashing green. I watched it pulsing on the display, the seconds counting down beneath it, 5, 10, 15, and didn't pick up the phone. I just put the phone on the wide wooden windowsill, screen down, and stared out the window at the swing again. After 2 minutes, maybe 3, the phone vibrated again, tapping against the wooden surface. Lawrence again, of course. Who else would it be? I didn't look at the screen, just listened to the phone shake, making a monotonous sound. The call cut off at the 20th second. There was silence, in which only my breathing and the sound of rain could be heard. Then the vibration again, a short, jerky message. Then another one a minute later. Then another call. I got up from my chair with difficulty, my knees stiff, picked up the phone and carried it into the kitchen. I put it on the old kitchen table, covered with a small flowered oilcloth, closed the door to the room tightly so I wouldn't hear the vibrations. I went back to the chair, sank into it, and pulled an old knit blanket of dark green over my shoulders. I was cold, bitterly cold, though the apartment was warm. Time stretched strangely, viscously. I didn't know how long I sat like that in the chair. Maybe half an hour, maybe a whole hour, maybe even more. It was getting dark outside the window, and the rain was getting heavier, the drops drumming on the glass. My stomach rumbled lingeringly, and I remembered that I hadn't eaten anything since morning, except for 2 sips of coffee. But I didn't want to get up, and food seemed unnecessary. There was a knock at the door. 3 short, jerky knocks, then a pause of 3 seconds, then 2 more, softer knocks. I recognized that particular rhythm at once. Only Daphne Craig, my 4th-floor neighbor, knocked like that. I thought about not responding, about keeping silent, about pretending I wasn't home. But Daphne must have seen the light in my windows, knew I was here. I struggled to get out of the chair, walked barefoot into the hallway, and opened the door. On the threshold stood Daphne, a tall, almost a head taller than me, gaunt woman of about 75, with short, neatly trimmed gray hair and intelligent gray eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. She wore an old terry cloth robe over jeans and a warm sweater, holding a small thermos with a steamy vapor coming from it. "Good evening, Greta," she said in a calm, even voice. "I brought tea, ginger tea with honey. I thought you could use something hot right now. I wanted to say that it was okay, that I didn't need tea, that I wanted to be alone. But instead, I just nodded and stepped back, silently letting her inside." Daphne walked into the kitchen with a confident stride, as if she'd been here hundreds of times, though she hadn't actually come in that often. She set the thermos on the table next to my phone, which continued to vibrate intermittently, and pulled 2 small packets of sugar from her pocket. "I saw you arrive in a cab about an hour ago," she said, opening my kitchen cabinet and pulling out 2 white cups. She remembered where I kept everything. "Thought it was her son's wedding day. You're back pretty early if the ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock. So something went wrong." I stood in the doorway and didn't say a word. Daphne poured tea into both cups. It was amber golden in color, fragrant, with the distinct scent of ginger and the slight sweetness of honey, the steam rising in spirals. She handed me the cup, and I took it with both hands, soaking up the warmth. "Sit down, Greta," Daphne said softly. "You look like you're about to fall over." I obediently sat down. Daphne sat across from me, her fingers around her cup. We sat in silence for quite a while, 2 minutes, maybe 3. I stared into my tea at the small particles of ginger floating on the surface. Daphne looked at me calmly, without pressure. She knew how to be quiet in a way that wasn't awkward. For 34 years, she'd taught high school English literature, raised 3 children all alone after her husband left her for another woman. The wedding didn't happen, I said finally, my voice sounding hoarse. Well, it started, but I canceled it. Right there in front of all the guests. Daphne raised her eyebrows slightly in interest. Canceled the wedding? That's a pretty drastic move. I canceled every payment I've made in the last month. I took a sip of the scalding tea. The restaurant, the musicians, the decorator, the photographer. It was all in my name, you know. I just picked up the phone and canceled everything. In front of all the guests. Daphne nodded, sipped from her cup. I suppose there was a reason for that. Lawrence said in front of everyone that I didn't pay for anything. I set the cup down, my hands shaking. That I hadn't contributed a dime to his wedding. Yelled at me, told me to get out. Cheryl, too. In front of 70 guests. Daphne. But you paid for it, didn't you? $14,000. I closed my eyes. Almost my entire savings. I paid it all off a month ago, and they made it so lavish. 70 guests instead of 50. Flowers everywhere, musicians, crystal. When I tried to ask, Lawrence yelled at me. Daphne listened in silence. I opened my eyes, looked at her. He said I was dishonoring them. I continued, the words flowing out, that I hadn't put anything in. And I stood there, and everyone was looking at me. And then I pulled out my phone and canceled the whole thing. I just pushed the buttons. The wedding fell apart. The manager said they couldn't proceed without payment. Lawrence tried to pay with his card, but there wasn't enough money. So I just turned around and walked out of there. You did the right thing, Daphne said firmly. I looked at her in disbelief. What? You did the right thing, she said again. Greta, I've known you for 15 years. You've always apologized for existing. You've always made everyone comfortable except yourself. You apologized to the mailman when he was wrong. You apologized to that annoying downstairs neighbor when she complained about the noise, even though you never made any noise. You've spent your whole life trying to be invisible, and your son takes advantage of that. He's my son, I whispered. The only one. So what? Daphne leaned forward. Does that give him the right to yell at you in public? Accuse you of lying? You didn't lie, Greta. You paid for his wedding. You gave him almost all the money, and he called you a liar. I was silent, clutching the cup. My throat constricted. Tears came to my eyes, but I didn't let them come. I thought I was doing the right thing, I said. Parents are supposed to help their children. I wanted him to be okay. Helping, yes, Daphne nodded. But don't let them wipe their feet on you. There's a difference between helping and humiliating, Greta. We were silent again. Outside the kitchen window, it was getting darker and darker, and the rain was getting heavier. I got up and turned on the overhead light. The lamp flickered and flooded the kitchen with white light. I went back to my seat. He called, I said, nodding at the phone. A lot of times. I didn't answer at once. You don't have to answer. Daphne finished her tea and set the cup down. Not until you're ready, or maybe you shouldn't answer at all. But he's my son, I repeated almost absent-mindedly. Just because he's your son doesn't make his behavior right. Daphne stood up, walked to the sink, and rinsed the cup. Greta, I've raised 3 kids myself. 2 of them are normal. They call every week, come over, help out. The third one, Roger, only shows up when I need money. Last time he asked me for $500 for some project. I said no. He took offense, hasn't called in 6 months. And you know what? I'm relieved. I love him. He's my son. But I don't have to put up with him using me. I sat there and I listened to her. I've never been able to say no, set boundaries, defend myself. All my life I'd been soft, malleable. With Edward, with Lawrence, with my coworkers at work. Always agreeing, giving in, never causing trouble. What do we do now? I asked quietly. He wouldn't forgive me. I ruined his wedding. You didn't ruin his wedding. Daphne wiped her hands with a towel. He ruined it when he insulted you in public. Greta, do you realize what he did? He took your money and told everyone you gave nothing. This is not a mistake. It's not a breakdown from excitement. It's cruelty. The word cruelty hit me like a slap in the face. I never thought of Lawrence that way. He was inconsiderate, selfish, abrupt at times. But cruel? Maybe he was just mistaken, I said weakly. Forgot I was paying. Maybe Cheryl had gotten it wrong. Daphne gave me a long look over her glasses. Greta, you're a grown woman. You don't have to lie to yourself. He wasn't wrong. He knew exactly who was paying. He just didn't want it to look like his mom was supporting him. He was embarrassed in front of the guests. So instead of thanking you, he humiliated you. I sat there, digesting her words. Somewhere deep down inside, I knew she was right. I'd known from the moment Lawrence had yelled at me, but it hurt to admit it. He'll call again, Daphne said, heading for the door. He'll apologize, promise. Maybe he'll cry. But it's up to you whether you believe him or not. All I'll say is, you have a right to be angry. You have the right to defend yourself. And you don't owe anyone forgiveness, not even your own son. She stopped in the doorway, turned around. If you need anything, I'm upstairs. Knock any time, even at night. Thank you, Daphne, I whispered. She nodded and left. I heard the door close, the sound of footsteps. I was left sitting alone in the kitchen. The phone vibrated again. I flipped it open. A message from Lawrence. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. Then another. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. Call me. Then another. You've ruined everything, but I'm ready to forgive you. I read that last one twice. I'm ready to forgive you. He's ready to forgive me. For what? For paying for the wedding? For canceling the payments after he called me a liar? Something inside me trembled, shifted. I stared at those words and suddenly realized I didn't feel guilty. For the first time in a very long time, maybe in my entire life, I didn't feel like I owed him an apology. I felt anger, pure, burning anger. I spent 3 days in the apartment, barely leaving. The phone kept ringing first frequently, 10 times a day, then less frequently, 3 or 4 times. I never answered a single call. The messages came in long strings, and I read them but didn't answer. Lawrence wrote angrily, blaming me for ruining the wedding and embarrassing me in front of the guests, and then pitifully begging me to at least talk to him. Cheryl wrote once, too, a short, angry message saying that I had ruined their celebration and she would never forgive me. I read it and deleted it. Daphne came by every night. She brought soup in a thermos, fresh bread, or just sat with me in silence, and that silence was healing. She didn't ask if I was going to talk to Lawrence, didn't give me advice, didn't comfort me with false words about how everything would work out. She was just there for me, and that was enough. On Wednesday morning, as I sat with a cup of coffee by the window, looking out at the gray March sky covered in dense clouds, the doorbell rang. Not a knock as Daphne used to do, but a long, insistent ring, then another, shorter, then another long one. I froze with the cup in my hands, instinctively realizing who it was. My heart beat faster, my chest felt tight. The call came again, even more insistent. Then I heard the knock on the door, loud, demanding, leaving me no choice. Mom, I know you're home. Lawrence's voice was muffled by the door, but I heard every word. Open up, we need to talk. I set the cup on the windowsill, stood up. My legs felt woozy, my hands were shaking. I walked slowly into the hallway, stopping after each step, as if I hoped he'd change his mind and leave. But the bell rang again, and I knew he wouldn't leave. I opened the door without removing the chain. Through the narrow slit, I saw Lawrence standing on the landing, wearing a black jacket and no hat, his hair disheveled, his face red with cold or anger. His eyes were inflamed, dark circles under them. He looked tired and agitated at the same time. Finally, he breathed when he saw me. Open up, Mom. I need to talk to you. Say it like this, I said, without taking off the chain. His voice sounded smoother than I'd expected. What do you mean, like this? He frowned. Open the door normally. What am I, a stranger? Say what you have to say. Lawrence ran his hand over his face, exhaled with irritation. Mom, stop this nonsense. Open the door. I'm freezing in here. You can leave if you're freezing. He looked at me as if I had said something completely unbelievable. His eyes widened, his mouth dropped open. Are you serious? You're really not going to let me in? I'm your son. You wanted to say something, I repeated. Say it. Lawrence clenched his fists, then unclenched them, clearly trying to pull himself together. He inhaled deeply, exhaled, a cloud of vapor hanging in the cold air. All right, he said slowly, honing each word. All right, let's talk like this. Do you even realize what you've done? We had a wedding, Mom. A wedding. 70 guests, half of them my coworkers and Cheryl's work partners. And you made a circus out of it. You canceled payments in front of everyone and walked out, leaving us to deal with this nightmare. I listened and didn't speak. He continued, his voice growing louder and louder, the words coming out one after another, choking me. Do you know what happened next? The guests left, who looked at us with pity, who laughed behind us. The manager demanded we pay at least part of it, so Cheryl and I had to take out a loan. A loan, Mom, you know? $10,000 at 20% interest. Cheryl's parents refused to help us. They said it was a disgrace. Aunt Viv is still not answering her cell phone. She's so upset. And you're just sitting there, not even picking up the phone. He stopped talking, breathing heavily. I looked at him through the narrow slit and thought that a complete stranger was standing in front of me. Every word he said was all about him, his shame, his credit, his problems. Not a word about what he'd done to me. Not a word about how he yelled at me in front of all the guests, how he called me a liar. Are you done? I asked quietly. He blinked, not expecting such a question. What? Did you say everything you wanted to say? Yeah, he stammered, then continued with renewed vigor. No, not everything. Why did you do it? Why did you do it? Why did you cancel the payments? We could have solved everything calmly, maturely. Like adults, I repeated, and something in my chest squeezed painfully. You yelled at me in front of 70 people that I hadn't invested a dime in your wedding, told me to shut up and get out. Is that what you call mature? Lawrence averted his gaze, looked away at the stairwell wall. I was nervous, he mumbled. Worried. Weddings are stressful, Mom. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I shook my head. But you did, and you're not even apologizing now. You came here to demand an explanation from me. What's there to explain? He looked at me again, irritation flaring in his eyes. You caused a scandal. You ruined everything for us. Cheryl cried half the night. Her parents think I'm a loser who can't even organize his own wedding. I paid for your wedding, I said flatly. $14,000, almost all of my savings. I paid for the restaurant, the musicians, the decorator, the photographer. It was all in my name, on my card, and you said in front of everyone that I didn't give you anything. So what? He threw up his hands. So I said it. I overreacted. You should have talked to me calmly afterwards, explained it to me instead of making a circus of it. Explain it to you. I felt something hot and angry rising inside me. What did I have to explain? That I wasn't a liar? That I really paid? Why did I have to prove it in front of 70 witnesses to my humiliation? Mom, stop being so dramatic. Lawrence stomped his foot. No one humiliated you. I was just emotional. You yelled at me. I heard my voice get harder. You told me to shut up and get out. In public, Lawrence. Cheryl yelled that I was embarrassing you too. That's not emotion. That's cruelty. He jerked like I hit him. Cruelty? Really? Have you thought about yourself at all? You ruined my wedding, Mom. My only wedding ever. I canceled the payments I made on my card. I countered. After you said I didn't pay anything, you lied to all the guests. Or did you really forget who paid? Lawrence was silent, clenching and unclenching his fists. I could see his jaw tense, the muscle under his eye twitching. I haven't forgotten, he finally said. But you don't understand. Cheryl wanted a beautiful wedding. Her parents, her co-workers, everyone was expecting something special. I couldn't tell them my mom was paying for it out of her pension. It would have looked pathetic. Pathetic, I repeated, and the words sounded bitter. It would look pathetic to tell the truth, and yelling at me, calling me a liar, that's not pathetic. I didn't call you a liar. You said I didn't put in a dime, in front of all the guests. That's calling me a liar. He ran his hand through his hair, mussed it even more. All right, I was wrong, he shouted. Happy with that? I admit it, but that's no reason to do what you did. We could have talked later, explained ourselves. No, I said. You couldn't. Why not? Because you don't think you were wrong. I looked him in the eye. You're saying that now, so I'll let you in and give you the money for the loan. But you don't regret what you did. You're angry that I retaliated. Lawrence froze. His face went pale, then red. That's not true, he muttered. I'm worried, Mom. Do you understand? I feel bad about all this. You feel bad because the guests left and you had to take out a loan, I countered. Not because you hurt me. Enough already. He raised his voice, pounded his fist on the door jamb. Stop playing the victim. I'm your son. I'm your only son. Can't you forgive me for one mistake? It's not one mistake, Lawrence. I shook my head. For years you've treated me like a convenient servant. I've always done what you wanted me to do. I always gave in, kept quiet, didn't object. And you took it for granted. What are you talking about? He frowned. I've always been a normal son. Normal. I grinned without joy. You called me once a month. You only came over when you needed something. You didn't come to my birthday party for 3 years in a row. When I was in the hospital with pneumonia 2 years ago, you visited me once in 10 days. I was busy. I had an important project at work. There were always more important things to do, I nodded. And now you've come and demanded that I forgive you because you're my only son, as if that were an indulgence for any behavior. Lawrence stood staring at me, a look of incomprehension mixed with anger in his eyes. What are you talking about now? What do old grudges have to do with the wedding? Everything, I answered, because the wedding was just the moment when I realized I didn't want to live like that anymore. Live like that? He snorted. What do you mean, living like this? Being comfortable, keeping quiet, tolerate, to apologize for existing. The silence between us was heavy, pressing. Behind him, a floor below, a door slammed. Footsteps, then silence again. Mom? Lawrence's voice became softer, almost pitiful. Come on, that's enough. Let's just forget the whole thing. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Let's start over. No, I said quietly but firmly. No, to what? I don't want to start over. I don't want to see you, Lawrence. He blinked as if he hadn't heard me. What did you say? I don't want to see you anymore, I said louder. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want you to come here. You're kidding, right? He took a step back. Mom, it's me, your son. I don't have a son anymore. The words came out, and I realized it was true. Lawrence's face contorted. He took a step toward the door, resting his palm on the door jamb. You can't say that. I'm your only child. Your only child. Do you want to be all alone? I'm already alone, I said calmly. I have been for years. It's because of Cheryl, isn't it? He changed tactics, his voice creeping up. You don't like her. You wanted to ruin the wedding. Admit it. This isn't about Cheryl. This is about you. Me? He laughed, a short, angry laugh. What did I do? Asked you to help with the wedding? Is that a crime? You took my money and told everyone I didn't give anything. You yelled at me in public. You told me to get out. And even now, you can't just apologize. You're demanding, accusing, manipulating. I'm not manipulative. He banged on the joint again. I'm trying to get through to you. You're my mother. You have to love me no matter what happens. Love is not an obligation to endure humiliation, I said, and my voice shook, but the words were clear. I'm tired, Lawrence. Tired of being comfortable. Tired of apologizing for myself. Tired of you taking me for granted. He was silent, breathing hard. Then he backed away from the door. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, I get it. Here's the deal. I came here, tried to talk to you. You didn't even answer the door. Cheryl was right. You're a selfish woman who only thinks about herself. The words should have hurt, but I didn't feel much, just emptiness. Go away, Lawrence. I'm leaving. He turned around, took a few steps toward the stairs, then turned around. Just know that if you send me away, it's for good. I'll never come back. I won't come. I won't call. That's it. You'll be alone. I'm already alone, I said again. Go away. He stood there for a second, then turned and stomped down the stairs. I listened to the footsteps recede, the door slamming downstairs. Then I closed my door, took off my chain, turned the key in the lock. She went into her room and sank into a chair. Her hands were shaking, her heart was pounding. But there was a strange lightness inside, almost weightlessness. I looked out the window. There was a car on the street below the window, and I recognized it. A dark blue Lawrence sedan. Cheryl was in the passenger seat, and I could see her blonde hair. She was staring at the driveway. Lawrence came out of the driveway, got behind the wheel. They talked about something, and I could see him gesturing, Cheryl shaking her head. Then the car started and drove off. I sat there and watched them go. When the car went around the corner, I closed my eyes. I don't have a son anymore. It was a week after Lawrence's visit, 7 days during which my phone was silent, no calls, no messages. I didn't expect them, but I still checked the screen first thing every morning when I woke up. It was blank, silent. Lawrence had kept his promise not to call again, and it was strange. It was both a relief and a dull ache somewhere in my chest that didn't go away, but only dulled with time. I woke up early on Saturday morning, when dusk had not yet fallen and the streetlights were still burning yellow outside my window. I sat up on the bed, pulled on my robe, and went into the kitchen to put the kettle on. The water boiled slowly, and I stood at the window and watched the sky gradually lighten, turning pale pink in the east. It was a cold March morning, but clear, without yesterday's rain. I poured myself some tea, added a spoonful of sugar, stirred, listening to the quiet clinking of the spoon against the porcelain. She came back into the room with the cup in her hands and stopped at the old dresser that stood against the wall opposite the window. The bottom drawer held photo albums, 3 thick volumes with worn covers that I hadn't opened in years. I set the cup on the dresser, squatted down, opened the drawer, and pulled out the first album. I settled into the chair, put the album on my lap, and opened it. The first picture was of Edward and me getting married in February of '75. We're standing at the entrance to the community center, me in a simple white dress my neighbor had made, Edward in a gray rented suit. Both of us smiling, young, happy, full of hope for the future. I ran my finger over the picture, over Edward's face. He was a good man, kind, thoughtful. He died 15 years ago of a heart attack, suddenly, without warning. I remember that day down to the smallest detail. How he complained of chest pains, how I called an ambulance, how the doctors tried to save him, how they told me he didn't survive. I turned the page, the pictures from the hospital. I'm holding newborn Lawrence, tiny, red, wrinkled, wrapped in a blue blanket. Edward is standing next to me, looking at his son with adoration. More photos. Lawrence at 3 months, at 6 months, at a year. First steps, first birthday, first tooth. I flipped through the pages and looked at this little boy smiling from the past. So sweet, defenseless, completely dependent on me. Here's Lawrence at 5 in kindergarten, in his bunny costume at the New Year's matinee. Here he is at 7, September 1st, with a bouquet of gladioli almost bigger than he is. Here at 10, riding the bicycle Edward gave him. I remember Lawrence's excitement about that bike, learning to ride in the yard, me standing at the window watching, afraid he'd fall and hit it. More pages. Teenage Lawrence, angular, awkward, showing the first signs of growing up. High school graduation. Lawrence in a suit. Me next to him in a blue dress. Both of us smiling. But the smile isn't so open anymore. Something had changed by then. Some distance had appeared between us, though I couldn't say exactly when. I closed the first album, set it aside, and picked up the second. There were fewer pictures here. Lawrence didn't want to be photographed anymore, avoiding the camera, looking away. A few pictures from his 20th birthday, from his college graduation, where he was getting his technician's degree. Edward had died by then, and in the photos, it's just me and Lawrence, standing next to each other. But there's an empty space between us. There are almost no more pictures, 1 or 2 a year, no more. Lawrence and his co-workers at a corporate event. Lawrence and Cheryl when they first started dating, both looking at the camera, smiling, holding hands. I remember taking this picture, trying to catch the right angle, Cheryl fixing her hair and asking me to reshoot. I closed the album and put it down on the first one. I pulled out the third, the thinnest. There were only a few pages of photos. The last few years were almost undocumented. One was from Lawrence's birthday party 3 years ago, when he was still visiting me. We're sitting at the table. I've baked a cake. There are candles on the table. Lawrence is looking at the phone, not the camera. I remember that day. He came for an hour, ate a piece of cake, said he had to go urgently, and left. I was left alone with the unfinished cake. I sat and looked at those pictures, and I didn't cry. There were no tears, only a kind of detached curiosity, as if I were looking at someone else's life, someone else's family. The little boy in the pictures and the man who had come a week ago and yelled at me through the door, they seemed like different people. Or maybe it was me who had changed and looked at everything differently now. I closed the last album and put all 3 stacked on the dresser. I didn't put them back in the drawer. Let them sit here in plain sight for now. Then I'll decide what to do with them. Maybe I'd put them on the mezzanine, or maybe I'd throw them away. Now I didn't know for sure, and it was okay not to know, not to decide right away, just to leave them as they were. I finished my cooled tea and looked at the clock. 9 in the morning. The day was just beginning, and there was a whole Saturday ahead of me, empty, with no plans, no business. Before it would have depressed me, An empty day seemed like a sentence, a reminder that I had nowhere to go and no one to go to. But now I felt only calm, almost indifferent. The phone rang, and I flinched in surprise. Picking it up off the windowsill, I looked at the screen. Daphne, I answered it. Good morning, Greta. Daphne's voice sounded cheerful. You didn't wake me? No, I've been up for a while. Oh, good. Listen, I'm going to the park for a walk. The weather's nice, sunny, not too cold. Do you want to come along? I looked out the window. Indeed, the sun had already risen. The sky was clear, blue, without a single cloud. Outside, the wind was bending the branches of the trees, but not as much as yesterday. Which park? I asked. Riverside, across the river. It's got nice paved paths, easy to walk on. We could feed the ducks if we brought bread. I thought about it for a second. When was the last time I went to the park? I don't remember. About 3 months ago, maybe more. Usually I only went out to the store for groceries, to the clinic when I needed to, and that was it. Walking for the sake of walking seemed like a luxury I didn't have the time or inclination for. Okay, I said. I'll go with you. That's great. Daphne was obviously pleased. I'll be ready in half an hour. I'll meet you downstairs in the driveway. Okay. I hung up the phone and went to get dressed. I took out of my closet warm jeans, which I rarely wore, a thick gray sweater, comfortable low-top boots. She combed her hair, looked at herself in the mirror. My face was still pale and tired, but my eyes weren't as droopy as they'd been a week ago. I applied some cream to my cheeks, put on a light lipstick, not because I wanted to look pretty, but just so I wouldn't be so gray. I put on my coat, tied up my scarf, grabbed my purse, locked the apartment, and went downstairs. Daphne was already waiting at the door, wearing a long dark green coat, a knitted hat, and gloves. She was holding a bag of something. I took bread for the ducks, she explained when I approached. They say white bread is bad for them, but what can you do? We walked down the street toward the bus stop. The number 12 bus took us to the park in 15 minutes. We got off, and I immediately felt the fresh river air, smelling of water and the first spring greenery. The park was large, with wide paths lined with old oaks and maples, still bare but ready to shed their leaves. We walked slowly, taking our time. Daphne was talking about something, about a neighbor from the 5th floor who had a kitten and now it meowed at night, about the fact that they were going to change the pipes in the house in the summer and would have to go somewhere for a week. I listened, nodding, sometimes inserting short comments. I didn't feel like talking, but it was pleasant to listen. Daphne didn't demand answers, didn't expect my participation, just shared her thoughts. We reached the pond in the center of the park. There were 20 ducks floating on the water, quacking, diving, chasing each other. Daphne took the bread out of the bag and started breaking off pieces and throwing them into the water. The ducks immediately rushed to the shore, jostling, snatching the bread from each other. I looked at them and suddenly smiled, for the first time in a week. They're funny, I said. Yeah. Daphne tossed another piece. They're always fighting over food, but they're friendly. Do you want to feed them? She handed me the bag, and I took a piece of bread, crumbled it, tossed it in. The ducks swooped in instantly, gulping down the crumbs, quacking contentedly. I fed them and felt something warm in my chest, something simple and human, the joy of doing something good, however small. When the bread was finished, we went further along the path, along the river. The water flowed calmly, dark gray, reflecting the sky and the bare branches of trees. On the opposite bank, we could see houses, cars, people. How do you feel? Daphne asked, not looking at me. I'm fine, I said, and I thought it was true. Strange, but fine. Lawrence didn't call again. No, he said he wouldn't if I sent him away. Kept his word. Daphne nodded. And how are you getting on with it? I wondered. How am I doing with this? A week ago, I would have freaked out, panicked, rushed to call first, apologized, begged for forgiveness. But now, I don't know, I admitted. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes I'm scared that I'll be all alone. But more often it's just calm. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. It's normal, Daphne said. It's okay to feel what you're feeling. You don't have to feel guilty. We were silent for a few minutes, walking and listening to the gravel rustling under our feet, the wind rustling in the branches, a dog barking in the distance. A man in a tracksuit with headphones in his ears ran past us, and we stepped aside to let him pass. You know what I realized? I said suddenly. All my life, I've been trying to be needed. Edward, Lawrence, my coworkers at work. I thought that if I was comfortable, quiet, helpful, I would be loved. I'd be appreciated. E? And it doesn't work. I grinned without joy. The more you try, the less you get noticed. Because they get used to you always being there, always ready to help, always agreeing. You become furniture. Daphne stopped, turned to me. You're right, she said gravely. You're absolutely right. People need to be taught how to treat you. If you let them wipe their feet on you, they'll do it. Not out of spite, but because they can. I've let them, I nodded. Lawrence, especially? I thought that's what a mother should do. Giving everything, asking for nothing in return. A mother should love her child, Daphne argued. But that doesn't mean the child has the right to disrespect her. Love does not exempt from respect. We moved on. There was a playground up ahead, a few children swinging on swings, their parents standing nearby, talking. I looked at them and thought about how I used to bring little Lawrence here, pushing him on the swings, catching him at the bottom of the slide, afraid he would fall. Where is that boy? When did he turn into a stranger who yells at me and demands money? Don't you regret what you did? Daphne asked. About the wedding? I thought, no, I don't. I guess I should, but I don't. I'm just tired of putting up with it. You should be. Daphne put her hand on my shoulder. You have a right to defend yourself, Greta, even from your own son. We walked in a circle around the park, back to the bus stop. We waited about 10 minutes for the bus, and we stood in silence, staring at the road, at the passing cars. The wind fluttered my hair, and I adjusted my scarf, pulling it higher, covering my neck. Thanks for calling me, I said to Daphne. You're welcome, she smiled. We'll go regularly if you want. Every Saturday, for example. I want to, I nodded. The bus arrived, we got on, and drove back. I looked out the window at the streets, houses, people passing by. Life went on, regardless of my problems, my pain. People went about their business, laughing, talking on their phones, hurrying somewhere. The world didn't stop because I had an argument with my son. We walked outside our house, up the stairs together. On the third floor, Daphne stopped. You know where to find me if you need me, she said. I know, thank you. I went into the apartment, undressed, hung up my coat. I went into the room and sat down in a chair by the window. The albums were still on the dresser, and I looked at them. Then I looked out the window, at the street, at the people below. For the first time in years, maybe in my whole life, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything to anyone. I don't have to explain myself, make excuses, apologize for what I am. I didn't have to be comfortable, quiet, unnoticeable. I could just be me, whatever that me was. I didn't think about reconciling with Lawrence. I didn't imagine him calling and apologizing. I didn't dream about things getting better. I just sat in my chair, looked out the window, and breathed steady, calm breaths. I just moved on, and that was enough.